Hey, reader, this is Centaur here, and we are continuing our study of nations from second edition, options that are available for them. Today, we're looking at a nation that is going to help to show, in my mind at least, how maybe the options that are available for them doesn't necessitate that they're going to perform badly on the table. And that's because the army that we're going to be looking at is rated 18th in my mind in terms of options that are available for you, but it is also an army that I am currently preparing for my next tournament. Whenever it is that I go to, my next event in the area, I'm actually actively preparing an army for it, not because I want it to be a joke or a meme, but because I think it can actually do pretty well. It has a very interesting cross section of things, but I'm also honest that in terms of what's available to you, it's got some glaring weaknesses. If you cannot guess from the helmets in this picture, that army is Greece. And so we are working right now on a cool Greek army. I've got some cavalry squads with some cool Greek flags painted up on them. Just because, you know what, why not? It's just kind of fun. And Greece, for those of you who don't remember, they were on the side of the Allies, mostly because a bunch of their primary neighborly opponents in the region that they have some strong backgrounds with were more inclined to be aligned with the Axis powers. And they were also longtime allies of the British. And so, because of that, you have a large number of British and French weapons that have made their way over to Greece by the time the war begins. They end up fighting a pretty stalwart but ultimately unsuccessful resistance against the Germans, first the Italians and then the Germans. There's like a little bit of there is a little bit of warfare and kicking about between them and the Bulgarians, but not really much, to be completely honest. Mostly because of the Metaxas line, which was basically the Maginot line, but for Greece. And so really, really tough defenses all around. But they do eventually end up getting pushed out. There's also a Fallschirmjäger invasion of Crete, but a number of Greek soldiers end up falling back from their rejoining up with the British, and they actually participate in like the North African campaign. I think they also do some work in Italy, if I'm not mistaken. So like they're involved in the war pretty heavily up until the end, but obviously the lists that we currently get aren't really designed to showcase that. And then you have an underground partisan movement that goes on against the invading powers. Really up until Greek independence in the late 1940s, that starts up following the invasion of World War II, but even continues afterwards against other forces as the war comes to an end until the Greek independence can be reestablished. As we're looking at the rules, though, you'll get an idea of why they place so low, because there are some pretty clear gaps in their inventory. To start off with, the three Army special rules that Greece has are, again, very much copy-paste from other stuff that's in the Minor Nation Allied book. From I think it was originally first edition. I don't think this was a second edition book. And so the result is it's kind of a mixed bag of meh to bad. We get fieldcraft, which means that units that start the game hidden can start in ambush, which is great if you actually can start with units hidden. Otherwise, the special rule may not come up at all. Ambush itself is pretty much a useful ability unless people decide to not take movement actions like run or advance, and instead they just fire on the ambush unit. In which case, you could end up with some problems with how that all works out for you. Either you're going down and losing the benefit of ambush, or you're just taking pins, possibly even wounds, possibly even being removed before you can do anything with it. But the bigger issue long term is that you are ceding initiative when you do this, because you're taking dice out of the bag that could help you to get the first draw or the second draw or the third draw, and you're already putting them down on the table. Could be advantageous, could come out to a bunch of nothing. It all depends, right? Highly situational special rules, not my opinion of a very good special rule. The second rule is infiltration, which means that you don't suffer the penalty to outflank, which is great if you intend to outflank. There are some good outflanking units for Greece, unlike some of the armies that get the infiltration special rule. At the same time, do you want those units to be missing in the first two turns of the game, early so that they can come on being turn 3? Especially when the first third of the game in terms of turn count may not necessarily be the first third of the game in terms of time, right? A lot of games, the first couple turns are the longest ones, and then as units are removed and as decisions become a little more clear that everybody needs to be making, then the turns tend to speed up, right? So if you like outflanking, great. I do it on occasion, but honestly not that much, so I don't rate it particularly high. And then communications breakdown is objectively a bad special rule, but honestly, sometimes it doesn't come up, right? If you don't have the first dice that's drawn out of the bag, if it's drawn by your opponent, then it doesn't change anything. If they do end up drawing it, then per the special rule, they have the ability to throw your dice back in if it's the first draw on the first turn, and then they redraw another one. But it's not like they've taken it out of the bag and reduced the odds of getting one of your dice, right? So like if you're going for a higher dice count than your opponent, you might still actually be okay, and you might still get the first draw. So in that sense, it's fine. I don't think it's actually as horrible as it looks, though objectively it doesn't help you either. When looking at your HQ sections, they're actually pretty good. Your officers, you can get access to inexperience. There's not a lot of reason to take veterans, so that's all good. Your forward observers, you get artillery observers, no air observers, which is probably for the best. You only get veteran medics, which is not good, because for the points you're paying, you're less likely to get your points back, and they're not that useful, my humble opinion. So if they had regular medics, that would be better, but not particularly good here, and no particular specialty officers or liaisons or anything like that. In terms of infantry, your infantry are actually pretty great. Arguably the best we've seen so far in this series. Your inexperienced troops are pretty average in that they can take, light machine guns. I think they can take a submachine gun on the NCO. You also get access to things like the VB launcher, which I'm not generally a big proponent of light mortars. Link to the video up here so you can see why. But if you're going to take a VB launcher or a light mortar on a unit, taking it on an inexperienced unit is not that horrible because you're cheaper already. 55 points for 5 men with a VB launcher is not bad at all. And you're ignoring that -1 tape penalty for being inexperienced when you're firing indirect, which the VB launcher always has to do. So on the whole, it's not bad. It's a fine choice, cheap choice in case you want it. Can be helpful just for getting a few extra order dice into the bag, or allowing you to splurge on other stuff a little bit later. Your regulars are actually really good. They're average to good in that they get the same sort of stuff everybody else gets: access to light machine gun, access to the NSO taking a submachine gun. But for +1 point on your regulars, you can make them mountain men, and they can get tough fighters, which makes you quite dangerous in close combat, actually, both for being charged and for charging other people, which is nice. It can turn a regular rifle squad into a pretty dangerous close combat squad, which is great. And with delivery systems available to get you in close, you can actually reliably get assaults in with these guys if you really want to. Your veterans are fantastic. You get veteran cavalry, which is a great combo, not very easily removed, very survivable, and likely to do some damage to the enemy. Not the greatest assault unit in the game, not going to rate it as excellent, but it is very good and quite useful. The issue I have is that even though there was quite a bit of specialization and some interesting things going on in the Greek army, we don't have any of those represented here. So while they never had like airborne troops, for example, they did have some very interesting specialists. And when we talk about changes that I would make, we're going to talk about those more below, but just know that for the purpose of the ranking, they don't get credit for any of those. So we aren't going to credit them here. When looking at the team weapons, there again, it's very similar issues to what we see across the entirety of the armies of France and the Allies book. Your machine gun teams are average. You don't get access to heavy machine gun teams, but that's probably for the best in second edition. Your mortars are limited to light and medium mortars, which is fine and good. Nothing wrong there. Your anti-tank teams are limited to the AT rifle, but the AT rifle is excellent. It's very serviceable. We're going to talk about that in a video coming up. Your snipers are normal, nothing special, nothing interesting going on here. No problems. You don't get access to any flamethrower teams and no other kind of specialized team weapons that you get access to. On the whole, not horrible. These guys, this is going to be part of the backbone of any Greek army that you build, whether in second edition or third. When looking at artillery, you get all 3 types of howitzers with no downsides, no major drawbacks or issues, which is all very good. Anti-tank guns, you get access to the light AT gun, which is really all that there is there, and that's maybe for the best because it saves you from spending a lot of points. They're going to get wiped out by a mortar. But on the whole, I don't see them being very attractive over and against the howitzers, or for that matter, the anti-aircraft guns. Your AA guns are actually quite good because you not only get a cheap light autocannon, which is a great suppression tool. You can pay points to take it as I think it's a Hotchkiss 25 millimeter. I can't remember which one it is, but you can strap on a second light autocannon, giving you 4 shots, looking at either Pen +2 or a 1-inch HE template off of each, which is fantastic. The chance likelihood that you hit something with that is quite good every single turn, which I think will work out really well. You don't get access to multiple rocket launchers. Fair enough. I don't think that's a big issue per se. And when we look at armor, I'm not gonna lie, it's actually really bad. You get access to the Vickers. I forget which style it is. I want to say it's like the Vickers 6-ton or Mark 6 or something like that, but it's the one that has the heavy machine gun on it with the coaxial medium machine gun, which is not great on a DV7 tank. And then you get access to the Renault FT17 with the option to upgrade it to the 18 with the low velocity anti-tank gun. Not the greatest. Like, yes, the Renault FT is better than a machine gun team, only just. And none of these are going to provide the firepower that you kind of need in the heavy weapons department because that's the current lacking spot in the Greek, uh, in the Greek army order of battle. And typically tanks help to fill that role, even with just a light AT gun, and you don't get access to that here. You get absolutely no self-propelled guns, no AA platforms, no specialized vehicles. It's pretty bad. For what it's worth, though, as regards tanks, this is a pretty complete list. We're not missing very much in terms of what happened historically, so fair enough. When you look at the armored cars, things actually get a lot better. In fact, you kind of wish you could take 2 armored cars instead of the 1 tank and the 1 armored car in the regular generic reinforced platoon and the theater selected for Greece. Because your tankettes, you get access to the Italian L33, including the L33-35, which has 2 forward-facing machine guns, which is fantastic, and it's got a really low profile. So it can take advantage of cover very easily while still at the same time being quite dangerous to enemy infantry. And then you have the Peerless Armored Car, which, I mean, there are debates and arguments about which armored car this actually is. But in this case, it's got 2 machine guns and a turret and still got recce, just like the Italian L3. So both of these are really good. You pay about 15 points more for the Peerless Armored Car. In exchange, you get wheeled movement and you get the turret option. I think either of these can be great. It all depends on what you want to do and what your strategy is. So all in all, pretty good options for the armored cars. No specialized recce vehicles, no nothing crazy going on here. And when we get to tows, it's basically the normal brand of stuff, trucks, civilian cars, horse-drawn limbers, that sort of stuff. But they add the Bren carrier, which is fantastic because the Bren carrier both can have 2 light machine guns, if you build it that way, or it can have a light machine gun with a 360-degree arc, which is fantastic, and an AT rifle out the front. So if you need a little bit of extra heavy weaponry, it's like you've strapped an AT rifle team for free onto your transport that is fully armored, open topped, fair enough, but still fully armored. So it's not going to be so easily removed by small arms. Because of this, your gun transports are pretty good. You get access to the upgunned truck like everybody does. You get access to the Bren carrier, both of which are very good. Tows are awesome, mostly because you get the horse-drawn limber. But on the whole, nothing crazy going on here, but still pretty good options all around. So in terms of the best choices, I think regulars just for supporting fire can't hurt. In terms of providing those pins down range to help your troops. You've got cavalry for assault veterans, which is fantastic. You have medium mortars, which is good, solid supporting fire for taking out entrenched troops. You get the double light autocannons. As much as I love traditional field howitzers, I think I would go with the AA guns on this one. I think you're in a much better shape for second edition with those because for 80 points regular, you're getting a lot of value out of those. I think your armored car slot, whatever you end up choosing, you're going to do fine. It's a good infantry suppression tool. And then I think Bren carriers carrying mountain troops is going to be a really good shout. So you take a 5-man regular team for 55 points, and then they've all got tough fighters on them, and you can drive them in with the Bren carriers. They man the Bren carrier light machine gun until they get up nice and close, and then they jump out, and then they can shoot at people on the first turn and then start running people over on the second turn. And I think that would work out pretty okay. Army's not horrible. So sample list to give you an idea of what it might look like. I'm running a couple of transports. This is not a fully mechanized army because the support teams aren't there, but all of the infantry sections are moving up quick. So we've got a lieutenant with his furthermen, inexperienced. They'll be sitting in the truck that we're going to buy down below, along with 10 mountain infantry. They'll also be regular sitting in a truck. And then we've got 2 squads of 5-man mountain infantry. Again, just regular 55 points each. Each of them will be sitting in a Bren carrier. You've then got 2 squads of 8-man cavalry sections, just for, moving up, providing a little bit of extra cover, drawing a little bit of fire from the enemy, which is fine, but then eventually running things over. You got your AT rifle for support. for supporting firearm, medium mortar, inexperienced to help him out. Sniper team because we had the points and I didn't really have any other slots to spend it on. But again, it'll provide those nice pins and, maybe help to take out a flamethrower or something like that before we end up getting stuck in. You've got the Brita 20 mm with the extra autocannon. You've got the Peerless Armored Car. And then you've got your truck with a machine gun purchased regular, and then two AT rifle Bren carriers with the Pinto LMGs regular. You can save points, by the way. On this, you could save 10 points each if you drop the AT rifle and just go back to LMGs, in which case you get double LMGs on these, which is fine. I just didn't really have anywhere else to spend the points, to be completely honest. And I thought, it might be nice to have some extra heavy weapons, especially since all of the heavy weapons are pen plus two. So I figure we're going to need a lot more of them if we're working with that. And then Horse Drawn Limber rounds it out for 999 points, 15 order dice, which is good, but not like oppressive, in my opinion, which means, this would be, I think, pretty fun to play against, but it would still have a good number of options, playing very differently from a lot of other armies. Looking at third edition so far, they attracted me for a lot of reasons. First of all, the new platoon structure does help a lot. You don't have a lot of heavy weapons. You don't have a lot of good heavy weapons. So because of that, just being able to take more of your stuff definitely helps. I think the trio of the rifle platoon, the heavy weapons platoon, and the artillery platoon is probably the best way to go, in my opinion. You can take an armored platoon. The problem is that a lot of people who run armored platoons are running them for a mix of anti-personnel, anti-armor, and you really don't have any good anti-armor rolls. Like technically, for my force, I have started preparing a Renault FT with the, and I'll throw a low velocity AT gun on it, but like I'm honest, it's not great for that. It's just that it's, a fully buttoned up damage value 7+ vehicle that's a relatively cheap potential, company commander, platoon commander for them. On the whole, I think that the Italian L3 is the way to go. I think even with the halved shots from MMGs, having double shots from the front is really, really good. For the cost that you pay, I think that it's a very, very solid option and that you'll work out okay. But on the whole, most of what you're going to be relying on is just going to be infantry. Now, I got these guys as part of a Kickstarter campaign for STLs, and I think they also do physical files as well on my mini factory, which I'll go ahead and I'll copy everybody on. I'll link to it down in the description below so you guys can see it. But yeah, the sculpts are good. They do have very distinctive helmets. You might be able to get away with using helmets from another nation in bolt action if you wanted to kind of proxy these. Probably early war British uniforms, question mark, or greatcoat uniforms. So you might even be able to get away with a French set. But in general, they're using a very distinctive helmet. They did use, I think, Adrian helmets in World War I. So you might be able to get away with saying, well, these guys are reserves that have been called up, and you could get away with just buying French plastic sprues and just use the Adrian helmet. It might work out okay. But on the whole, I liked having things that looked like most of the Greek army, so I went with a Kickstarter instead. That's what I did. But on the whole, I think the combination that I really liked was potential to set stuff on ambush because, if life gives you access to a double auto cannon, then one would be pretty wise to use that. I think in third edition, this is a really, really solid choice if you're going to be taking an artillery platoon, because it will do work for you pretty much all the time. And then combine that with reliable outflank, which is really nice in case you've got transports moving people up or you want to bring your cavalry in or something like that. I think that that's really solid. And then mobile cavalry on turn one, which is how I would use cavalry forces. Take advantage of that field craft so you can make a run action straight through a set of woods or, something like that to really aggressively move up, get it nice and close where they thought that they were pretty safe. And now it turns out they're not. Set yourself up so that way you're nice and in really good cover. So that way on turn two, you can start running people over and start taking out team weapons or small infantry sections or, stuff like that. I think that that would work out really, really well. So, I wasn't necessarily looking for grease, but I was looking for that cross section of I want good solid attack infantry. I want to have, a few more options in terms of deployment and outflanking and reserves. And I want to have the option for ambush at the beginning, alongside easy access to tough fighters. The Greeks hit all of those marks. So in terms of changes that I would make, as I mentioned, there are some things that are missing. Not so much in the vehicles and artillery section. They covered those pretty well. But there are some infantry examples that I think would help to add some flavor to Greece, as well as allowing you to play Greece in other times of the war other than when they're fighting first the Italians and then the Germans. So for starters, there was a pretty substantial partisan movement that fought back against forces down there in Greece among the occupiers, and this continued even after the war. Uh, I would make this a simple, inexperienced section. I would give them maybe fanatics. So, this way they, I would maybe give them pistols required. So they're only 8 points per man each, but, starting at 40 points and then, going up depending on how many of them you want, I'd make them like 5 to 15 men with pistols. I think that would be interesting. I think it would be different. Again, pistols don't have assault, so it's not going to be a cheesy sort of thing, but it does mean if you want some cheaper infantry sections, you could supplement like that. I would also break out the mountain troops. I wouldn't make it a +1 for tough fighters on your regular infantry. I'd have your regular infantry, and then I'd give you access to mountain troops, and they would just start with fieldcraft for an extra +1 point, and then you could pay an extra point if you wanted to give them access to tough fighters as well. So they'd run you somewhere between 10 to 12, well, 11 to 12 points per man. And otherwise, rifles, light machine guns, maybe give them access to something like VB launchers or mortars or whatever, because they did use quite a few of those for the mountain troops. You can see it there actually in the picture. Like the number of light mortars that were fielded by the Greeks was truly insane. There was more than one mortar for every 1,000 feet of the contact line. Okay, so it was intense. They used a lot of mortars, so I don't have a problem giving access to light mortars to more than, to almost every infantry section. I think it would be fine, especially considering the price point for mortars. I think that's okay. I would also have an Evzones unit, which would basically be those same regulars we just talked about, but at veteran level, because the Evzones, I mean, they did quite a bit of work, quite extensive work, and they were very, very useful. In fact, the Evzones units in the Korean War were heavily involved in helping to teach American forces and Allied forces what they needed to know in terms of fighting in the mountainous regions of Korea. So, like, they have a long history, they have a very strong history, and I would like to see them present in the game, and they aren't right now. They also had a large number of border troops that were trained in border defense. I mentioned earlier the Metaxas line, which was kind of a really long, strong defensive line designed to protect mostly against Bulgaria. But you had a lot of troops that were specialized in the training of how to defend trenches, defend bunkers, and stuff like that. And so I think having a regular veteran unit that's relatively standard but comes with stubborn would be very interesting. Different. Again, they don't have paratroopers, so this kind of helps to fill in that kind of gap for them, but in a way that makes sense. And then the final one is one I didn't know about until I started doing the research on it. But there was a specialized group of Greek infantry, one of the most decorated units that they've ever had, which is saying something, because they've been involved in quite a few wars over the years. And this is the Sacred Band. And this would be a group of veteran fanatics that would basically be very similar to the British SAS. So they would have access to quite a few submachine guns. They'd get access to, some light machine guns, possibly upgrade to the Vickers K, because the Sacred Band mostly ends up working alongside the British in North Africa. They learn a lot from the Special Air Service. I can see why maybe they didn't include the Sacred Band because they don't really make an appearance, not really until like 1942, after Greece has already fallen. So I kind of get that. Again, I'm really interested in providing you with options that can help you play all of Greece, not necessarily just one particular part of the conflict. And this is where theater selectors would come in really handy and but I think that I think there's an option here for a more expensive, very durable sort of assault unit that's not necessarily a cavalry squad. And that would make it interesting and make it different, right? For what we're looking at. In terms of new special rules, again, I don't like copy paste. That's not something that I really enjoy. And so what I would do is I would replace their special rules with two special rules and then an optional third one of which you get to pick and choose between two. And so the first one is I would give them the Mountain Defenders special rule. The overwhelming majority of the fight when it came to Greece happened in the mountainous northern region of Greece. And they made very, very good use of that to slow down and bog down the Italians and even slow down the Germans, although that was ultimately unsuccessful. And the special rule here for mountain defenders is that Greek units that are present in forest or mountainous terrain add a +1 to their cover saves. So traditionally, this would be a soft cover save, right, that you're getting from natural environment sort of stuff. And this would improve it to a 4+ cover save, effectively a heavy cover save, which I think would be really good and highly useful. It means that it's highly situational, right? Because you may be playing on the streets of Paris and your special rule doesn't come up at all. But in as much as you're playing in an Ardennes forest sort of map, or just anything that has a couple of forests or other rocky terrain features in it, it allows you to fight like Greeks, which I think is awesome. Okay. again, I don't think it's going to actually change all that much, especially considering this isn't a particularly sticky army, right? Most of the units that you're going to have hiding in there are going to be regular infantry, which is 4 plus, possibly inexperienced infantry, which is a 3 plus to wound. So, like, they're not particularly durable. You don't have veterans camping out in these unless you, like, run a group of uh, cavalry into a force and then have them dismount, right? Like, you're not going to have a lot of that really on the board. But hypothetically, I suppose you could. And then the second rule that I would give them is I would give them mortar reliance, where I would allow, and I know people are going to call this crazy, but hear me out on this. I would give their mortar selections, their light mortar and their medium mortar, the extra selection special rule. Notice this is, again, nothing free. Okay, we're not giving away a benefit for free to your units. You can just take more of them. One, as I mentioned earlier, they had a dramatic number of mortars, and especially those light mortars and medium mortars, 81 millimeter mortars, that they were utilizing all across the contact line. And that comes down to the fact that howitzers and other, direct fire weapons like anti-tank guns, they just couldn't get the angles that they needed because of the mountain fighting that they were doing. They relied on mortars. And I think being able to see large amounts of mortars is, one, unique. We don't really get that from other nations unless people are running grenadier units or they're spamming rifle platoons or something like that. But this would make it for a very interesting type of fight. Now, remember, you got to keep all those mortars safe, and Greece doesn't really have too many tools to do that. So I don't think it'll be as broken as it may seem up front, but I think it would make them very interesting and very appealing. I think you would see a lot of people saying, I think I'm willing to splurge, spend the money, and actually try to invest in an army that doesn't have a plastic sprue. Because it's different, right? It's interesting. It's unique from other stuff. It's a lot of hoping and praying and fishing for sixes and then later on fives, right? Like, it's a lot of that. But I do think this would make them a very interesting army to play. And then I'd give them a choice of one of two rules. I would either give them access to battlefield knowledge, which is the same as the one in the PDF. It's basically a conglomeration of the two Army Special rules that are not communications breakdown from second edition, right? It's, a combination of, your units can start an ambush on turn one, as well as, they have field craft for moving across rough terrain on turn one, and they also get, to ignore the -1 for outflanking. It's a good, useful utility sort of thing. Plays to some strategies, maybe doesn't play as well to others. People are running large amounts of mortars. Mortars aren't necessarily the best on ambush. So because of that, I think there's a reason to take it. I think there are some armies that would prefer to have something else. For those ones, I would recommend Italian engineering. Ironically, considering who they were fighting at the beginning of World War II, the Greeks did buy quite a bit of equipment from Italy, really, really good equipment from Italy. And so borrowing from the Case Blue rules that we saw, since we're using 20 millimeter Breda light autocannons, since we're using Italian-made anti-tank rifles, I would love to see them get the reroll failed damage rolls with AT rifles and light autocannons. Now note, they have to get damage on a vehicle or an infantry unit, and that's not necessarily the easiest thing to do. But I think having something like this would make it so that since you are primarily limited to very low penetration modifiers, highest you even have is Pen +4, the best that you have is Pen +2. I think being able to at least allow them to reroll failed damage rolls means that at least they're doing something more often. Again, they're still going to struggle against enemy armor because damage value 7+, you might be wounding on 6s because of the long range penetration penalty applying to all of your stuff. Against damage value 8, you might not even be able to roll to wound at all, right? And then anything higher than that, you won't be able to roll to wound at all. So it's a pretty niche area, but at least it would mean, hey, better chance of doing more reliable stuff with the limited tools that we have. And I think that would make for a very interesting army. I think that, obviously, not just because I'm currently collecting it and getting it ready, but because I think that, an army that's relying primarily on, anti-tank rifle teams and mortar teams and, small numbers of relatively minor heavy weapons, but in very large numbers, could be something interesting to watch. Could be something interesting to play against. Could be different from the normal experience that you see. And I think in general, people have been seeing that the armies that they're facing are more or less pretty similar. And this would help to kind of shake things up. But what do you think? Do you think that this is maybe a little too much? Do you think that maybe this goes a little too crazy? Is there anything that needs to be toned back? Is there stuff that they had access to that I missed that we should include? Let me know down in the comments below, and I will see you next time.